Hello and welcome to today's Infrastructure Automation with Ansible Tech Tuesday webinar brought to you by Insight Cloud and Data Center Transformation Division. I'm Amanda Sharp, Marketing Specialist at Insight Cloud and Data Center Transformation, and will be your moderator today. Before we begin, I wanted to cover a few housekeeping items. This webcast is designed to be interactive between you and the presenters. The webcast console you're looking at can be completely customized. You can resize or move any of the windows that you have open. If you have any questions during the webcast, you can click on the Q&A widget at the bottom and submit your question. All questions from this webcast will be captured. If you are experiencing any technical difficulties, please visit the webcast help guide by clicking on the question mark icon below the presentation window. The help guide covers common technical issues. I would now like to turn this presentation over to our presenter, Omid Eghaneyan. Omid, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Amanda, and thank you all for joining us. Today's webinar is unique in that it'll be half presentation, half live demo, which will be run out of one of our Insight lab environments. Starting with the introductions, on the phone we've got Andrew Connor. He's our lead delivery engineer for automation projects. He has experience not only automating processes and procedures, but adding the self-service capabilities around automation. He has also been a key component to putting together a lot of the logic behind the demos and will show us around Ansible Tower. We've got myself, Data Center Architect Omid Eghaneyan. I've done solutions delivery work with various storage and compute platforms. Me and a handful of my colleagues are taking the procedures we go through in delivery and translating them into Ansible playbooks or scripts. We've also got Andy Nelson, one of our principal architects, who has led large initiatives around automation. We'll have him tell you more about that right before we start the demos. Now, getting into the agenda, we'll start with an overview of why people are moving towards automation. The cases automation is not ideal, and a bit of the things in between. Then we'll move on to why Ansible, how it's different, and a quick overview of its components. After that, we'll jump into the demos, which start off showing the basic functionality, then go into more of the logic that can be put around Ansible and Ansible Tower. Finally, we'll open it up to questions. Please submit your questions throughout the presentation, and one of the three of us will be answering them during the demos or during the Q&A, whichever is more appropriate. So, why automation? Now, a big one here is consistency and standardizing the environment. And this cascades to the next few. For someone like me who was on the delivery side, that looked like making sure no step was missed during a deployment, whether it was standing up vCenter, deploying UCS, setting up a NetApp cluster. It's tailored to the customer's environment without missing any critical steps. For a system admin, that could be updating the configuration on hundreds or thousands of hosts, or getting out of the minutia of the day-to-day, like managing users, installing packages, starting services. Simplicity. Now, this one's a bit of a catch-22. We want the end product to be simple, but getting to that state takes a bit of complexity. You could go to a public cloud vendor like Azure, and the interface you see is relatively simple and straightforward. But I don't think there's a developer out there who would look at that back-end code and be like, yeah, I could probably throw that together in a day. On that same note, so many of us have been to the cloud and for whatever reason have come back. But now we have this desire for those cloud-like operations. And automation can help straddle the divide in simplifying operations in the private and public cloud. Now, repurposing resources. Some have the misconception that automation will remove the need for a skill set, which isn't correct. And we'll see that here in the demos. But rather than getting bogged down in the mundane, you can focus on what's next. Now, both of the next two, IAC and DevOps, could very well be their own standalone webinars. Tracking and versioning your infrastructure is, in my opinion, the gold standard of where you could be for the private cloud. At that point, you've reached infrastructure as code, which we dive into in a few slides. After that, we'll briefly discuss the role of automation and how it plays into the DevOps evolution. But first, let's explore the cases where automation doesn't make that much sense. A big thing to consider here is ROI. How often is this done, and how long does it normally take me? If the environment is static and has infrequent change, spending days on automating a task that takes a couple hours, done once every few years, doesn't make that much sense. A Rube Goldberg machine on that right there is a great example. They're awesome, super fun to look at, really interesting, but not all that efficient, and they're not designed to be. But an even bigger consideration is the processes. Before automation is implemented, taking a step back and asking, are these processes done efficiently? Do they make sense? Is there a better way to do this? Is critical. Automating poor processes can quickly lead to a high severity incident. Let's throw an example out there. If there's a self-service portal for end users to request restores, but no process to track utilization of the back-end storage, you may be a few database restores away from causing that storage system to crater. Now, this next one may seem obvious, but it's definitely worth mentioning. Not a lot of sense in implementing automation on a system that's about to go away. For example, if you're historically a Windows shop and now you're moving to Linux, going back and automating the Windows environment and the tasks run in that environment would definitely not be a good use of time. Now, environment and culture also need to be considered. If it's set in stone and there's absolutely no way your traditional silos can work together for some political compliance or security reason, then automation can't really be all that successful. Where the, quote, automation fun really happens is when these teams get together. Also, if you, for whatever reason, be it size or politics, are unable to perform any kind of charge or show back of your IT resources, you'll have a similar scenario to what I previously described. But rather than your storage system cratering from resources, it's probably going to be your annual IT budget, because you'll chew through resources so quickly and you won't know what went where. Now, I hope that after discussing the reasons why not to automate, you've stuck with us, because the next few concepts get pretty fun. Infrastructure as code. Just like virtualization abstracted infrastructure into files, automation abstracts it into code and API calls. It gives way to the whole pets versus cattle mentality. With IAC, no longer are we as concerned with the underlying system, because that system can be replaced or replicated simply by changing a few variables. Now, there are three different types of IAC. Declarative, which is code focusing on the results and not the process of achieving those results. Ansible uses mainly declarative approach. So writing a playbook or script does not require a lot of knowledge of the current state of the server, for example, only its desired state. We'll see aspects of that in the demos. The imperative focuses on the process. How are you going to achieve the end results? And certain flow control methods like loops and conditions can be added to an Ansible playbook, giving it a bit of an imperative approach. Now, intelligent IAC is environment aware. It determines the correct desired state and makes suggestions for changes in the code. They've got a series of movies on this. The Terminator films, I don't know, you may be familiar with them. Okay, I'll try not to do any more bad jokes, but I can't make any promises there. Now, methods of IAC. Put simply, you have your push and pull devices. A device like a Meraki pulls down its config from a certain location, whereas in the case of Ansible, you're pushing out the config to devices from a particular system. And listed there at the bottom, you've got examples of your IAC tools. That's just a handful. In Ansible, which we're taking a closer look at today. Now, the DevOps evolution, and DevOps at its core is cross-functional teams working together to reduce the time to implement a change, while also reducing the likelihood of issues with that change. In a DevOps approach, you have everyone from your system admins, network engineers, DBAs, to your developers working together, so communication is key. Breaking down the traditional silos has to occur. For that to happen, you have to do more than just plan out what your desired outcome is. You've got to normalize your technology stack and reduce variability. Then expand on the DevOps practices, which, at their core, help organizations innovate faster. Again, there is a lot to talk about with those, but for the sake of time, we can't dive too deep into that. Now, automating infrastructure capabilities, which is the part Ansible plays in all of this. And then providing self-service capabilities, getting your CRM tool like Salesforce to integrate with your back-end infrastructure. Of course, the appropriate workflows must be established to make sure the right oversight is put in place. Overall, the goal in all of this is enabling agility while keeping risk as low as possible. Now, here is an overview of a few DevOps tools, and we can take a look at where Ansible fits in. That circle right there contains a handful of automation tools. Now, automation has been around for a while, way before Ansible. In fact, people have been running tools like PowerShell for a while now to automate all sorts of tasks. So let's take a look at what makes Ansible special. Now, what is Ansible? And forgive me for a second, please, while I read directly off the sides here, because their definition is Ansible is a radically simple IT automation engine that automates cloud provisioning, configuration management, application deployment, intra-service orchestration, and many other IT needs. My take? It's an open source, desired state configuration management tool built to improve consistency and help organizations scale. Now, here's a high-level overview. It does not require an agent to be, so nothing installed on the machine itself, but that being said, you will need to be within certain code revisions to run some of the modules. It connects via SSH or WinRM. So those ports are normally opened in an environment, which is another plus. Again, open source. The code is all built on Python. It refers to it as scripts, it's scripts as playbooks that are declarative based in YAML. One of the best parts about Ansible is its adoption rate among a wide-scale list of vendors. A handful are listed there. The playbooks interact with the various systems via modules. Think like a task or library plugin. There is also the ability to reuse previously created code via templates and roles. Now, Ansible Tower is a Red Hat licensed product that adds access control, scheduling of jobs, knowledge and visibility. It can also provide logic and orchestration to jobs. The demos will all be run in Tower, and the last demo will show off some of the more unique capabilities of Tower with handling workflows. Now, in the spirit of the open source community, we will be sharing the code run in the demos. The link at the bottom is a public Git repo where the code will be. Keep in mind, it won't include some of the logic put around Tower, but it'll provide a good example of what the playbook looks like and a tip of the iceberg in terms of capabilities of Ansible. Also, in the spirit of the open source community, support of these playbooks is not included, but we can definitely have those conversations, and for that, please reach out to your account executive. For your own use, finding a way to share code is important for version and access control. This tool will vary based on what suits your organization's needs, and what we've provided there are a few examples. While we switch things over to the demo, I'd like Andy to briefly discuss the projects where we've implemented Ansible to provide customers an IAC environment. In the meantime, please keep those questions coming.
So thanks, Omid. Talk about some of the use cases of Ansible is rather interesting because a lot of people start thinking about Ansible in terms of automation right out of the gate. The code consistency and code control functions that Omid was just talking about are some of the interesting use cases that we've seen as of late. A customer that has a pretty static environment doesn't have a lot of need for dynamic provisioning or dynamic operations, but wants to make sure that when they deploy their ESX servers or when they deploy their storage or when they deploy their switches, they're doing it in a very consistent fashion. And so if you use something like an Ansible to do all that infrastructure deployment, you're guaranteed that it's in a specific state at the end of the Ansible tasks. That's also really useful for what we call configuration drift. And Omid mentioned this on a previous slide. The other big use case we're seeing in short is configuration drift, that we've got admins that go in and make changes and tweak settings and either don't update documentation or don't follow change control process or something along those lines. Ansible is really useful because you can rerun the playbooks that deployed those assets. And at the end, it'll come back and tell you, I changed these 3 parameters on these 3 hosts, and they're back to the state that they were originally in. That's been kind of the spirit of a lot of the automation that are being infrastructure driven. We're also starting to see other projects around self-service portals for developers, and this is in almost response to the public cloud. Developers love the public cloud because they can deploy assets with a click of a button. The problem with that is they also deploy budget at a click of a button, and that can get out of control pretty quickly. So we have a fair amount of our clients that are repatriating some of those development workloads and building a self-service portal on premises and trying to give the development community a similar experience to automated provisioning and then one click to get your databases deployed and your infrastructure deployed. And that's actually starting to save money. Generally speaking, on-prem versus public cloud tends to be a 3 to 5x multiplier. So when we talked about ROI in those previous slides, the ROI is pretty significant when we go to implement a self-service portal with automation behind it. So I'll turn it back over to you for the demos, Omid.
All right. Thanks, Andy. So my VDI session should be shared at the moment. And if you're not seeing this, please open up the media. There should be a media window posted there at the bottom. All right. So it sounds like the screen share is working. So I'm going to enlist Andrew Connor to help me show off Ansible Tower as well. And let's start with the dashboard. So here you can see a high-level job status, recent jobs that are run, and the templates. And we'll go over what the templates are here in a bit. And just your standard dashboard view. Jobs and schedules are both probably pretty self-explanatory. The jobs, you can track here what has run, and you can rerun a job. And schedules, you can think of any kind of job that we run here that we'll see. You can schedule, like Andy mentioned, eliminating configuration drift. So if you have a system that you want to periodically check, okay, are the services running? Is the configuration set? You can set that here in a schedule, and that'll automatically run, and you can check back on that the next day. My view is customizable here. And templates are where the magic really happens. Now let's go to create a template and kind of give an overview of what the different pieces are here. Now you've got your inventory file, which is, this is essentially linked to all of your different variables, right? So environment 4 is what we're working in today, and it's associated to the different hosts. So you can link these to the different projects and playbooks to make sure that there's consistency at the source, right? So your playbook would be what you want these variables and how you want these different variables to interact together. And then you can create different templates, bringing them together and running those jobs. Here's where you can also set surveys, which are prompts for your variables. And we'll see that here in a bit with the demos. And credentials are where credentials are stored. But before I move on, Andrew, is there anything here that I'm missing? Anything that we might want to talk to?
I think this is good to jump into right now. Some of the advantages of Ansible Tower we'll probably talk to a little bit later. Just kind of some of the things that Ansible Tower as a commercial product adds to just the Ansible core base. But there's some of the things Omid has already touched upon. Some of the things we'll touch upon in a little bit, but the advantages of Tower, he's already shown the job scheduling capabilities, how templates can be used to wrap traditional playbooks in Ansible, and some of the other things, of course, the user interface, the simple user interface, but some of the other things are tied around role-based access control, which is a very big value add. And so if we did go through like the user permissions that you can granularly apply to things in this product, also the credential administration that you have tying into like secrets management is a value add for Tower. And probably one of the biggest things that you don't see tied into the user interface is the mature API that Ansible Tower allows you to access, and that's really where you can tie in a lot of external integrations through with other tools using Ansible Tower as more of a back-end piece. So I don't want to take too much of your time there, Omid, but I did want to touch on some of that.
No, yeah, thank you. Thank you for mentioning that, Andrew. And here we've got the different projects, which is linked to the SCM, right? The source code and how it's managed. Right here, these green boxes are saying that it's live and connected to the code, like to our Git repos. And the inventories are, again, our variable files, essentially, here. So we can see what all of the playbooks and templates that we run today, these are the variables that they call on. So it's populated there, and they'll have to be specified for your environment. And actually not just your environment, any specific environment you're running these codes on. And here within the hosts file, you can see something pretty cool there. You can see the individual variables for this specific host. So whatever they are, they can be specified under the host, and that's going to tie into the first demo that we look at here. And I want to just show the ESXi hosts right now. So we're taking a look at the VM kernel adapters on these 4 hosts. We see that it ends at 6, and there are only 6 kernel adapters, right? And we're going to run this first demo will be what it looks like making a configuration change to those ESXi hosts. And all these variables are already hard set, so no prompts or anything. This is just going to kick off, and we can see it run on the back end. So we've set this. It's not necessary, right? We don't need a secondary NFS IP on this ESXi host, but we've set it just to kind of showcase its ability to do that. And it first, hit the project and pulled down the code, and now it's showing that, hey, the task is running. So first, it's adding the NFS VM port group, and you can see that it says changed. Now, what that indicates is that it added some, it made some kind of configuration change that wasn't there previously. Now, looking back on all of these 4 hosts, we can see, hey, there is VMK NFS 2. That's there now, which it wasn't there before. Now let's see what it looks like if we run it again. Now, if this was, if I was on the command line and I went to do this again, right, or add this port, it would error out saying that port already exists. I can't create it again. So let's see the behavior that Ansible performs here and what that looks like on this. So yeah, that's running again. Takes a bit of a minute. Oh, it changed. So we might have conflicting automation here, but with the kernel port, let's see what it does there. Nope. So it saw the kernel port here was already there. So it didn't make any kind of change because it's like, hey, I'm there. It's good. We're set. So
Omid, if we were to remove just one VM kernel port from one of the hosts, not all of them, what would that output look like? I mean, I know the answer, but this is pretty typical in my client base. Is we'll have somebody go and make changes to something, and we'll have a unique snowflake in the data center. We'll have one host that looks a little different than all the others, and we don't catch it until it's too late.
And we did on, I just removed that kernel port on ESXi03. So let's see what that output looks like now after it's run. And we have it each time before it runs a play, it pulls the fresh code. Okay, so we can see that, hey, it saw that that port group was there on 01, 02, and 04, but 03, it wasn't there. So it marks it as changed. So this is
potentially something you could run weekly, monthly, just to validate that your configs are all in lockstep. I mean, Ansible's kind of designed to run that way in some fashion, right?
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. The desired state validation. This is exactly that. All right, we're going through it. Now the next demo we're gonna show is creating a NetAppv server and then going and mounting the volumes. And so if you're unfamiliar with NetApp, what a vServer is essentially it's a virtual storage array. And this is us logged into our NetApp here, and we've got quite a few because it's a demo environment, so a lot of people are doing different testing. But we've got quite a few, and we'll go here and create a new one. We'll pull up that template, and this template implements a workflow, and we're going to see what that looks like. Create NetApp server. Okay. This is the basic visualization of what it does. It creates the NFS vServer, and then on success, if everything goes well, it goes in and it mounts the data stores in vSphere. So for this demo, I'm going to need a vServer name. I just want to show off that, hey, nothing up my sleeves. This was not there before. So Andrew Connor, do you want to give me a name for this?
How about live demo, live_demo? That's good.
Okay, we'll go with that. We can see that there's no, under our list of SVMs here, there's no live demo SVM. Okay, so let's go here and launch it. And this is our first prompt we have here. It's a survey. So now a lot of the variables are hard set in the inventory file, and they're all called upon there. But we can determine that. I can make all of the variables be prompted for here, but we don't want to sit here and have me fill that out each time. So I just have them hard set in the inventory file and only prompted when relevant. And that can absolutely be tailored to the environment. Now here, vServer name, we said live_demo. And this name will also get applied to volumes and path. Okay. So launch. So again, nothing here saying live demo now. Let's see that workflow kick off. All right, it's going to do that same thing too, where it pulls from the SCM, gets the fresh code, and then runs the job. Let's see if we can see the details file here, because this is pretty unique in that it runs quite a bit of modules. So, okay, gathered the facts. All right, created the SVM, started the services, created the interfaces, export policy, and created the volumes there. All right, so if we go back to the NetApp here, if we do a refresh, okay, there's that live demo with the NFS services running. Okay, let's click on that real quick. All right, looks good. Now let's see how far the workflow has gotten. Okay, even completed mounting the data source, so it ran that playbook as well. So there should be data source here saying live demo. Okay, yeah, live demo NFS1 and NFS2. So I just, based in the playbook, what I did was I created two NFS volumes, and we do this often just to show, hey, the plumbing works, right? It's there. But let's say, you know, this is a 1 terabyte volume, and that's not what we want in this environment. We want a specific number of volumes and create a specific batch based on the variables. Now we get more into that logic here. So let's explore this third demo with creating volumes based on different variables. So we're seeing a few prompts here. And the reason we're seeing these is just because for the vServer name, I didn't have that before Andrew Connor just gave it to me. Now I know live demo is going to be the vServer. And that's not something that's done in a day-to-day fashion. You're not creating a new vServer. So that could be hard set in the code, just like the cluster name would be. You know, hey, that's not going to change. So now it's live demo. We have that here. And then Datastore name. So what do we want to name this? It's going to create a batch of them based on the number we pick here. So what do we want to call these? Andrew, got any ideas for me?
I like consistency, so let's do live demo DS.
Live. What were those letters?
Oh, we'll just do live demo and then _DS for Datastore.
Okay, good stuff.
I also want to note something that Omid is showing here in this survey pop-up. This is a good way. It's something that Ansible Tower again has a little bit of an advantage over just Ansible, and that you can kind of abstract your inputs that are being passed into your workflows, your playbooks, and provide some business logic around it. Omid could be asking questions, and he could have drop downs, he could have check marks, and those questions can then be translated into some other set of variables. And that's
Is there
a really
reason
good,
we couldn't be asking for a chargeback number or a credit card at this point, Andrew? I know a credit card's a bad example, but
well, it's a good way. Yeah, it's a good way to abstract data and pass it off. A good example is when you ask for something like a T-shirt size, and then on the back end you might separate that T-shirt size for something into a certain amount of CPU plus a certain amount of memory plus a certain size of data, right? A disk size or something like that. And that's a simple example, but it's a good way of abstracting those business rules potentially and passing them off into variables on the back end.
Yeah, excellent. Thank you. Yeah, we can go into, once this runs, we can take a look at the different prompts as well. Because there's like even multiple choice, and like Andy mentioned, we could make it required that there is there is some kind of project code or something that's associated to this, so you can do resource tracking. So let's pick a data source size. I'll go with 250, and this is in gigs. I should have noted that here, but it's definitely not in terabytes. So 250 gigs. Number of data stores, let's make 5. You can go pretty high up to this. I think I set a max of 20, but then I've got to clean up 20 volumes. I have not automated the cleanup, because automating that is, the thought of ripping things out quickly is not appealing to me. But because, I try not to break the lab environment just quite yet. So to what Andrew was saying as well, the preview, this shows you how it translated that survey into those variables. All right, so this is what it's going to put into the files when we launch it. And the same kind of thing that we saw previously. But rather than creating the vServer, now we're just creating volumes. We're creating a set of volumes, and we're mounting those volumes. So doing batch jobs can be done very quickly, right?
And Omid is kind of showing something else here that we briefly touched on, but it's another powerful capability of Ansible Tower, is that there's a workflow job that you can create that will give you a capability to tie multiple playbooks in Ansible together and have a little bit more like workflow logic around it. So that we're running multiple playbooks at a time, and we're that do different things, but the Ansible Tower gives you that ability to tie those together.
All right. Yeah, thank you. And we're gonna see more of that logic here in the next demo. But now we can see that we've got all 5 of these volumes now not only created on the storage array, but also mounted in vCenter. Okay, now let's get on to my favorite demo, just because there's a little bit of it's a little hairy and complicated, and those are all the more fun because of it. So in this, we're creating a scenario, and before I run the job, I want to show you we've got a special VM folder for this demo, and right now there's no VMs, no virtual machines in this folder. All right, and in this scenario, let's say, for example, DBAs want a batch of SQL servers spun up in a matter of minutes with their specifications. And maybe they're saying, hey, I was getting that in the cloud and I want that here. But if your VMware admins aren't overburdened and the conditions are just right, maybe it can be done quickly. Or if they're swamped, which I see pretty often, it's normally the case that I find, it can take quite a bit of time. But this shows how Ansible can help with that. So if we launch this, we'll say, okay, how many SQL virtual machines would you like? And this could just as easily be web servers or whatever other kind of virtual machine or application server you have a template for. So let's say 6, right? Throw a number out there, 6. In fact, hold on, just 7, feeling lucky. Provide a name for the batch of SQL virtual machines. Okay, for consistency purposes, let's say live demo SQL. What data store would you like these to be created on? Oh, okay. Well, that's another one where we don't even have to ask it, but we can say, hey, I want to go back to this live demo, say 250 gigs. It might be enough. Let's see, live demo DS01. Okay. Okay, and then what storage vServer is this on? The only reason that matters here is because I didn't have that beforehand. Because we just created this vServer, I didn't have that variable before. But that could definitely be something that's, again, hard-coded. And what you could have in the survey is the IP range that you want these to use. You could really drill down so that whoever is filling out this form can get it, can get the virtual machine or the group of virtual machines just the way they like it. And all that's happening on the back end is the right approval workflows, everything like that to kick this off. So I'm just want to double check that SVM name.
Hey, Mr. Connor, so is there any reason we couldn't pass these variables in from another business-facing dashboard like ServiceNow or something like that?
No, in fact, that's a good one of the good things. This can be done in Ansible itself or with Ansible Tower, and we didn't touch on this, but the whole concept is around the concept of having dynamic inventories or things like that built out. But we can use dynamic variables. With Tower, we would probably want something like that driven through some of the API uses, but yes, Tower could easily go out, gather that information, and pull it in and pass it through.
Excellent. Yeah, so what we're seeing here, oh no, it failed. This is completely unexpected. Okay, there's a reason I'm not an actor. Okay, comparing requested space, so 700 gigs to available 250. So it's failing and saying that, hey, there's not enough space for this job. And it goes on the back end with that logic and says, okay, if I failed, what am I going to do? Expand that data store. And then it runs a set of commands to expand that data store on the back end. It sees that, hey, that occurred. What was it? Live demo DS01. Let's go see what happened to live demo DS01. Let's do a refresh here. Boom. Live demo DS01 is 770 gigs now, just to accommodate the new VMs that'll be provisioned off of it. Oh, and we can see that we've already got virtual machines populating in this Ansible demo folder. The live demo SQL 01 is populating. And these take about 4 to 5 minutes to create individually, and it runs through a loop. So it'll create one, and then create the next one, and create the next one. So no use in waiting for that. We can just jump to questions and have this run in the background, and maybe at the very end, take a look. Look at where we are there. So let's jump to what we've got.
So there's no questions right now in the Q&A queue. So if people have specific questions, please type them into the Q&A window, and we can answer them as they come in. I have a couple questions for you in the meantime, guys. So you keep dancing back and forth between Ansible Tower and Ansible, which I've seen that referenced as Ansible Engine. How are those different in how you get them and procure them?
I'll have Andrew answer that one.
Well, Ansible Engine, which many people just call Ansible or it's Ansible open source, is freely available and going to just it's freely available on most Linux platforms, also on Mac and a few others, but that's freely available. Ansible Tower is a commercial product that is provided by Red Hat. And if you have, so it has cost associated with it, but it's very value add. It provides quite a few capabilities in addition to Ansible. Ansible Engine is a command line tool set. So it has command line interface. It doesn't have an API tied to it. A lot of the other things, role-based access control, the UI, things like that. And if you had questions about how to obtain that, beyond that, you can either reach out to either with a question or something else. Andy, did you want to add to that?
No. That was what I was getting at. Is that there's a lot of confusion with my specific clients I work with on how do we get Ansible Engine, how do we get Ansible Tower. The other question I would have related to that is how does support work? Or are you familiar with how the different support structures work between the two?
I know that if we are, generally speaking, with Ansible Engine, the support structure for Ansible itself and the modules is community-based. A lot of the modules, for instance, the NetApp modules that can tie into that, a lot of the other ones that are more mature that are provided by the vendors themselves. So examples would be NetApp provides modules to Ansible. I believe VMware provides modules to Ansible. Those are community supported, but also very well supported by the vendors. Other modules are not quite as mature and supported. They would be community supported. With Ansible Tower, that support obviously increases because of the commercial product, and you could reach out to Red Hat on some of that, but the modules themselves would still have some of that community support involved with them.
Okay, thanks for that. So we've got some questions coming in from the audience. In no particular order here, somebody asked, what would happen if you have deleted one of your SQL VMs and then rerun the whole workflow with the same inputs? Will Ansible figure out it only needs to create one VM? I think that's redirected at both of you.
Oh, that's a great question.
In this case, I believe because of the way our playbooks are written, it will actually go out, and because of the way that Ansible, when using the modules that are idempotent, they will go out and look at what the desired state of your environment is, and it would only build the one VM out and leave the other ones as they were.
But to pull in on that, it's very module specific. Certain modules have that kind of logic built into them, and other vendors' modules don't always. So I think your mileage varies based on the module, right, Andrew? And how you structure the playbook. That
is correct. That ties back somewhat into the support that's around them. But with the modules that are into VMware, if you use the standard modules, it's very mature. VMware's NetApps are very mature modules. If you went and wrote your own module to deploy VMs, you would really have to write that logic in there so that if that it would act the way that you intend it to. There's more.
So I have another. That's a good answer, I think, to that question. Another question that just came in is, how does AWX compare to Tower? So my understanding is AWX is an open source framework built around Ansible. Do you know anything more about that, Mr. Connor?
Yes, AWX is the upstream open source version of Tower. It is freely available. It has the same kind of constraints around it as the Ansible engine would, is that it's a great tool to play with. I highly recommend it, by the way. It has almost all the same features that Ansible Tower does, but it's not commercially supported by Red Hat. It's community supported, so it's open source.
Are there any specific features that are missing or deprecated?
Not that I've seen. Again, it's upstream from Tower, so if you play with AWX, as with any tool, the features of AWX may not make it into the actual released product. It's very similar to that in the way it is.
Awesome.
There are some great, by the way, if you want to play with AWX, one of the easiest ways is through some of the Docker distributions of it. It's very simple to deploy. If you want to have backend databases, you need to consider that, but through some of the Docker stuff without some storage that is persistent and you don't care about the data, it's a great tool just to go and deploy through Docker.
Well, that's the perfect segue into the last question we have here. Somebody asked, and I'm going to paraphrase, that I think they're asking, do you suggest using Docker or non-Docker Ansible deployments and why? And you were kind of dancing around that a little bit.
Yeah, so I'm a proponent of Docker. Absolutely. When you get into needing persistent storage or things like that, I think you need to consider that when you do the deployment. There are many different ways of dealing with persistent storage. You need to consider, I think the default, if I go back to the AWX comparison, I think the default AWX installs its own Postgres database that doesn't really, it would be up to you to go and make sure that that underlying layer is backed up and things along those lines. So if you use Docker, just consider what you're using as the backend storage, the backend database, and whether you need those things backed up and those capabilities. If you're just playing with it, that's one thing. If you're deploying it into something that's more of a production use, I would definitely make sure you know what you're doing before you do that deployment.
Well, and that's a little plug into Containers 101 is hopefully we can get something like that on one of these Tech Tuesdays. Is the architecture around containers is fraught with disaster if you don't know what you're doing, and reach out to your friendly neighborhood Insight team if you need help building a container infrastructure, because you hit on all of them. It's HA, data protection, storage, all that kind of stuff comes back to bite you. But specifically to Ansible, is there a benefit of doing a containerized Ansible deployment or a standalone? There's nothing stopping me from deploying the packages on a running Linux box, right, Andrew?
Correct. There isn't, and many people have, it's as simple as just doing a deployment of Ansible. It's very easy to get into. It's a very easy, simple tool to get into for doing some basic deployments. You can have it just on a standard Linux box. You can do, if you are doing it on a standard Linux box, there are some dependencies upon Python, because Ansible is built upon Python. But if you use like a best practice of using a virtual environment for your Python distribution, it's very simple just to get started in it.
But if I'm using a containerized deployment of it, I don't have to worry about those dependencies quite so blatantly, right? That's probably
Correct.
the biggest benefit.
Correct.
So we have another question that just came in. Does Ansible have good integration with Veeam like it does with VMware? And I'm not sure I even know the answer to that, but I bet in 30 seconds of Google foo we could probably find out. Do you know the answer, Andrew?
I do not right offhand. However, it's a good plug-in for kind of how we would go about doing this. There's a URL, docs.ansible.com, that has most of the out-of-the-box modules very well documented. You can research the VMware ones, the Cisco, through many of the different network devices, AWX. I would go there first to see if there's a mature VM product. If there's not, the community resources around that would be what I would reach out to. But I don't have the answer to that question right off.
Well, there is, in the amount of time that you were talking, I was able to find that there is an Ansible Galaxy module specifically for Veeam. And it has pretty good ratings and a fair amount of downloads. But again, your mileage varies with open source, and Ansible's absolutely open source. So I'm sorry that's a little bit of a fuzzy answer to that question. But there is a module for Veeam. Pretty much anything that has an API, Ansible can wrap a module around pretty easily. but just be careful with some of the third-party supported ones. A lot of them are community supported, written by someone like yourself, and your mileage varies. Whereas some of the vendors like NetApp specifically, which we demoed here, those are actually commercially built and commercially supported. Ansible's got a new Ansible certified program for modules that vendors can participate in and actually register updates and get a little bit more rigor around it. Andrew was kind of talking about that earlier. Hopefully that's an answer to that question, and we can, if that doesn't suffice, we can absolutely take that and follow up with you. Insight has a fair amount of Veeam expertise, and we can probably bridge that gap with a little bit of work. Are there any other questions on the line? Those are the 4 that came in during the session. If not, we can always follow up. You can always follow up with Amanda afterwards.
And right now, what I've put on the screen as well is the resources that we've referenced throughout the presentation and the code used in the demos in our public Git repo.
Yeah, I don't see any other questions coming in, Amanda. So we can probably wrap up, and if folks want to follow up after the fact, again, you can reach out to Amanda directly, or you can reach out to your local Insight team, and they're happy to broker a conversation with us and others.
Great, thank you. Thank you for attending today's webcast. An on-demand version of this webcast will be available within 2 to 3 days. You will receive an email notification once the recording is available. Thank you again for participating in today's webcast. Have a great day.